When life seems uncertain and the path ahead feels unclear, we can find peace in the simple yet profound truth: God will provide for you. We live in a world that often feels unpredictable. Every day we are faced with challenges, and at times those challenges seem bigger than the resources we have to meet them. But even in these moments, we can trust that we are not alone. There is a God who sees our needs, hears our prayers, and is committed to providing for us in ways we can't always predict or understand. We often fall into the trap of thinking that we have to do it all on our own. We feel the pressure of the world telling us to work harder, be better, and earn more. But here's the thing: God's provision isn't limited by our circumstances. In fact, His provision often comes at the moment when we least expect it, in ways that we couldn't have imagined on our own. Think of the Israelites wandering through the desert, facing a life-threatening lack of food. They had left everything they knew behind, and they were journeying towards something better. Yet the journey was hard, and their faith was wavering. They complained, they doubted, and they even questioned whether God had brought them out there to die. But then God did something extraordinary. He provided manna from heaven. He didn't provide everything at once, but every single day, the Israelites received exactly what they needed for that day. The manna appeared every morning fresh, ready to nourish them. And when they tried to store it up for the future, it would spoil. God was teaching them that His provision isn't about hoarding, it's about trusting Him day by day. This is how God works in our lives. He doesn't always give us everything we want, and He doesn't give us everything we think we need all at once. But He does provide for us exactly what we need when we need it. It might not always look the way we expect it to, but He is faithful and He will not fail to provide. In those moments when we feel like we are lacking, like the pieces of our life aren't coming together, we can remind ourselves of this: God has always been a provider. He provided for the Israelites, He provided for His disciples, and He continues to provide for His people today. His provision is not dependent on our ability to earn it, but on His love for us. God will provide for you. When you feel like you're running on empty, when your energy is drained, when your resources seem exhausted, He will meet you at your point of need. His timing is perfect, even when we can't see it. You might not understand how He is going to provide, but that's where faith comes in. Faith isn't about knowing all the answers or having a clear roadmap. It's about trusting that even when you don't see a way, God has a plan. There's a story in the Bible that perfectly illustrates this. In 1 Kings 17, we see the prophet Elijah, who was sent by God to a widow in Zarephath. The widow was gathering sticks to make a final meal for herself and her son as they were facing a severe drought and famine. They had nothing left. But Elijah told her to make a small loaf of bread for him first, and then the rest for herself and her son. He promised her that the jar of flour and the jug of oil would not run out until the day God sent rain to the land. The widow trusted Elijah's words, and she did exactly as he said. And sure enough, every day, her flour and oil never ran out. She had just enough for each day, and she learned that God will provide for you, even when it seems impossible. The key here is that the widow didn't wait until she had a full supply before she trusted God. She stepped out in faith with what little she had, and God made it enough. You might be thinking, but I don't have enough. My situation is impossible. I don't have the resources or the ability to make it through. But what you do have, no matter how small it seems, is all God needs to work with. He takes what little we offer and multiplies it in ways that only He can. You see, the widow's faith wasn't about having all the answers or all the resources. It was about taking a step of obedience. And when she obeyed, God provided. He didn't just give her a little bit to get by. He gave her more than enough. The same is true for us. When we trust God with our limited resources, He will make them go further than we could ever imagine. There's another powerful lesson in the story of Elijah and the widow. When we place our trust in God, we open the door for Him to work miracles in our lives. It's not just about getting by. It's about seeing God's provision in ways that defy our understanding. His provision is abundant, generous, and it comes with a purpose to strengthen our faith and remind us us of His goodness. Sometimes God's provision isn't just about material things. It's about peace when we feel anxious, strength when we feel weak, and comfort when we are grieving. God provides for our emotional, spiritual, and relational needs just as much as He provides for our physical needs. And just as He provides for us, He calls us to be His hands and feet, to extend His provision to others. God will provide for you, but He also uses us to be a part of His plan to bless and provide for others. We don't have to understand how God will provide. We don't have to see the full picture right now. What we need to do is trust. Trust that when we are obedient, when we step out in faith, He will provide. He will not leave us to fend for ourselves. He is faithful and He will always come through. As we walk through this life, we will face moments of uncertainty, but we can stand firm in the truth that God will provide for you. He has provided in the past, He is providing now, and He will continue to provide in the future. His provision is limitless, and His love is unwavering. When we put our trust in Him, we can rest assured that He will meet every need according to His perfect will. So, whatever you are facing today, remember this: God will provide for you. You might not know how, but you can be confident in His promises. He is with you and He will never leave you or forsake you. Hold on to that truth and let it be the foundation of your hope as you move forward. When life becomes overwhelming, it's easy to forget that God's provision is not bound by the limitations we often feel. In the midst of uncertainty, financial struggles, relational difficulties, or health concerns, we can find comfort in the unshakable truth that God's provision is unfailing. So often we become fixated on what we lack, whether it's resources, time, or strength, and begin to doubt that God can meet our needs. But the Bible reminds us that God's provision is not tied to what we see or what we feel. It is a promise grounded in His infinite love and faithfulness. One of the clearest examples of this is the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. They had left Egypt, liberated from slavery, but they found themselves wandering in the desert without food or water. They began to complain and doubt, asking if God had led them into the wilderness just to die. Despite their complaints and unfaithfulness, God's provision never failed. He sent manna from heaven every day to feed them, and when they were dissatisfied with the food, God provided quail for them. He didn't provide a lifetime supply all at once, but He met their needs daily. This daily provision wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate act of God's faithfulness. Just like the Israelites, we too can forget that God will provide in His timing. It might not be in the way we expect or at the exact moment we desire, but we can trust that His provision is always enough for the day. Sometimes we find ourselves longing for more than what is provided in the moment, but the truth is that God knows exactly what we need. His provision isn't just about material things, it's about what will sustain us, grow our faith, and draw us closer to Him. Even in the midst of our toughest challenges, we must remember that God is always at work behind the scenes. His provision isn't just a one-time event, it's an ongoing process of care, guidance, and sustenance. When we lean into the truth of God's provision, it frees us from the anxiety and fear of running out, of not having enough, or of facing the unknown. When we trust that God will provide, we release the burden of self-reliance and rest in His sovereignty. God's provision is not just about getting by, it is abundant. He provides in ways that go beyond what we could ever imagine. In the story of the widow with the jar of oil in 1 Kings 17, God didn't just give her enough for one meal. She had enough for every day, and her oil never ran out. This wasn't a mere survival tactic. It was God showing that He is able to provide in abundance. His provision doesn't only meet the immediate need, it often exceeds our expectations and brings us closer to His perfect plan. And this truth about God's unfailing provision calls us to a place of trust. When we rely on our own strength, we limit our understanding of what God can do. But when we trust in His ability to provide, we open ourselves up to experiencing His blessings in ways that will strengthen our faith and reveal His glory. God's provision isn't just a promise for survival, it's a promise for abundance, faith, and peace. Trusting God often requires us to take a step of obedience, even when we don't fully understand how things will work out. This is where true faith begins, when we don't have all the answers, when we don't see the way forward, and yet we choose to trust God and act on His promises. The story of the widow in Zarephath is a powerful example of this principle. When Elijah asked the widow to give him some of her last bit of flour and oil, she was faced with a difficult choice. She could have held on to the little she had left, preparing what she thought might be her last meal. Instead, she chose to obey the prophet's word, and in doing so, she trusted that God would provide. This moment of obedience was not easy for the widow. She was in a dire situation, and the resources she had were limited. Yet her faith in God's provision prompted her to take action. She could have asked for more time or waited until the situation was better, but she didn't. She obeyed immediately, and in that obedience, she experienced God's faithfulness. God didn't ask her to have an abundance before she trusted Him. He asked her to trust Him with what little she had. And in doing so, He proved that obedience opens the door for His miraculous provision. God often calls us to act even when we don't have all the answers. Whether it's taking that first step towards a new opportunity, offering what little we have, or trusting Him with a difficult decision, obedience is the key that unlocks the door to God's provision. We may not see the full picture or understand the why behind what God is asking of us, but trust is built through taking that first step. Even when we feel unsure or uncertain, it's easy to want to hold on to everything, to keep our resources, time, and energy for ourselves, especially when we feel like there's not enough to go around. But God calls us to step out in faith, knowing that He will take whatever we give and multiply it. Just like the widow's jar of oil and flour, our faithfulness and small acts of obedience will yield results beyond what we can see in the moment. Obedience doesn't mean that everything will be easy. There will be challenges, doubts, and fears along the way. But each step of obedience is a step toward deeper trust in God. The more we trust God with the small things, the more we see His provision in our lives. And the more we see His provision, the more our faith grows, creating a cycle of trust and obedience that continually opens the door to God's abundance. When we choose to obey, we also choose to acknowledge that God's ways are higher than ours. His plan for us is better than anything we could create on our own. This act of obedience doesn't just bring us provision, it transforms us. It teaches us to let go of control and trust that God's timing, His provision, and His ways are perfect. It's through obedience that we learn to rely on Him, and in doing so, we experience His faithfulness in profound ways. Obedience to God is a declaration that we trust His ability to provide even when we can't see the way forward. It's a choice to let go of our own understanding and allow God to guide us. Just like the widow who gave her last bit of flour and oil, our small acts of obedience can lead to the abundant provision that only God can provide. Through this, we learn that trusting God doesn't always mean having all the answers, but it means believing that He will do what He has promised, even when it seems impossible. God's provision goes far beyond our material needs. While we often associate His provision with physical things like food, shelter, and finances, His provision is also seen in the peace He gives us when we feel anxious, the strength He provides when we feel weak, and the comfort He offers in times of grief. God doesn't just provide for our physical well-being. He provides for every part of our lives, including our emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. When we are faced with challenges that go beyond what we can see or touch, like a personal crisis or an emotional struggle, God's provision becomes even more significant. He offers a kind of peace that transcends understanding, a peace that guards our hearts and minds despite the chaos around us. This kind of provision is not something we can manufacture on our own. It's something only God can give. And this peace, which He provides freely, allows us to endure hardship with hope, knowing that He is with us through it all. Similarly, when we are struggling with physical health, we can rely on God's provision for healing and strength. While doctors, treatments, and medicine play important roles, there are times when God's touch is what truly makes the difference. He is the ultimate source of healing, whether it's through miraculous intervention or the gradual restoration that occurs through the natural processes of our bodies. In moments when our bodies feel weak and broken, His provision empowers us to press forward, trusting that He has the power to heal and restore. But God's provision also goes deeper than healing and physical comfort. In times of spiritual dryness, when we feel disconnected from God or distant in our faith, He provides spiritual nourishment. His word is a source of life, and when we seek Him, He will fill us. Even when we feel empty or spiritually weak, God's provision can renew our spirits, drawing us closer to Him through prayer, worship, and meditation on His promises. He doesn't leave us in our spiritual desolation. He provides the spiritual sustenance we need to grow and thrive, even when we don't feel capable of doing so on our own. God's provision for emotional and relational needs is another powerful aspect of His care. Relationships can be a source of joy, but they can also be a source of pain. Whether it's conflict, loss, or loneliness, God is the one who provides healing for our relationships. His love is the model for how we should love others, and He equips us with the patience, understanding, and grace needed to navigate difficult relationships. When we are hurting, God's provision can bring comfort, healing, and reconciliation. In moments when we don't know how to move forward, His presence provides the guidance and wisdom we need to restore peace and harmony. What makes God's provision so remarkable is that it isn't limited by what we can see or understand. He doesn't just give us what we ask for or what we think we need. He gives us what we truly need, even when it doesn't look like what we expected. This provision, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, or relational, is always given with a deep love for us. He understands our needs better than we do and provides for us in ways that reflect His perfect care and wisdom in times of scarcity or distress. It's easy to feel like we are alone or that our needs won't be met, but the truth is that God's provision never ends. It's ongoing, and it is more than enough for every area of our lives. When we face challenges that are beyond our ability to handle, we can rest in the knowledge that God sees us. He knows us, and He is providing for us in ways we can't always see. His provision is abundant, and it encompasses every aspect of who we are, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. God doesn't just provide for us in part. He provides fully, meeting every need we have in ways that reflect His boundless love and care. When we place our trust in God and choose to obey His guidance, we open ourselves to experiencing His provision in miraculous ways. Faith is the key that unlocks the door to God's abundant blessings, and when we trust Him, we allow Him to work in our lives in ways we can't always predict or understand. It's through our faith that we become recipients of His miracles, witnessing His hand at work in both small and profound ways. Throughout the Bible, we see numerous instances where people's faith led to extraordinary results. The miracle of the loaves and fishes is one such example. Jesus took a small boy's lunch, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and with the disciples' faith and obedience, He multiplied it to feed thousands. This wasn't just a demonstration of Jesus' power. It was a lesson on what can happen when we place our faith in God. Even when we only have a little to offer, what seems insufficient in our hands becomes more than enough when it is placed in God's hands. God is a miracle-working God, and when we trust Him with the little we have, He multiplies it. This principle isn't just about material provision. It's also about the small steps of faith we take that lead to spiritual breakthroughs. It's about trusting God with our dreams, our goals, and our future, even when we can't see the path ahead. When we have faith, we open ourselves up to the miracles He wants to perform in our lives. God's miracles are not always immediate or in the form we expect. Sometimes they unfold over time, teaching us patience and perseverance along the way. But even in the waiting, God is at work. The waiting period is not a time of inactivity. It's a time for our faith to grow. Just as the Israelites had to wait for the manna to appear each day, we too must trust in God's timing. His provision is always at the right moment, and it is designed to strengthen our faith and teach us to rely on Him. When we witness God's provision, our faith grows stronger. Each answered prayer, every act of divine intervention becomes a testimony of His faithfulness. These moments of miraculous provision are meant to build our trust in God, not just for our present needs, but for the future. When we see how God has come through for us in the past, we can face the challenges ahead with confidence, knowing that He will provide once again. But God's miracles are not just for us. They are meant to bless others as well. When God provides for us, He often does so in ways that allow us to be a blessing to others. Just as the widow's obedience resulted in a continual supply of oil that sustained her family and Elijah, our faith and obedience can lead to blessings that flow beyond us. We are called to be conduits of God's provision, using what He has given us to bless others and share His love. Faith opens the door to God's provision and miracles, but it requires us to step out in obedience. Trusting God doesn't mean having all the answers or knowing exactly how things will unfold. It means walking with Him even when we can't see the whole picture. As we take those steps of faith, we find that God's provision is not just enough to meet our needs. It is more than enough. His miracles are meant to glorify Him and strengthen our faith, showing us that there is nothing too big for God to handle. His provision is a testimony of His power, and through it, we are reminded of His endless love for us. In the end, trusting in God's provision is a choice that requires faith, obedience, and a deep belief in His goodness. We may not always understand how He will provide or when, but we can be certain that He will never fail us. His provision is not limited by our circumstances or our understanding. It is an expression of His boundless love and faithfulness. Just as He provided for the Israelites in the wilderness, for the widow in Zarephath, and for countless others throughout history, He continues to provide for each of us in our own unique situations. As we step out in faith, trusting God with what we have, whether it's our time, our resources, or our dreams, He will multiply it and use it in ways we cannot always foresee. Through our obedience, we open ourselves to experiencing His miraculous provision, and in doing so, we grow in faith. God's provision extends beyond our material needs, reaching into our emotional, spiritual, and relational lives, bringing peace, strength, and comfort when we need it most. So, no matter what you're facing today, remember this: God will provide for you. You can rest assured that His timing, His provision, and His ways are perfect. Trust in His promises and step forward in obedience, knowing that He will meet your every need according to His perfect will. God's provision is always more than enough.